I guess in the meantime, I can just start my spiel. Please. Hello.
Keep the door open, maybe people are coming here.
It's fine. I'm just so weird about it. Okay. I guess as people are still trickling in, I can do my little spiel because it doesn't matter nearly as much as the debate itself. So, hello, my name is Clarence. I'm one of the coaches for the University of Rochester Debate Union. I'm not going to talk for very long because I want the debaters to be able to talk as much as possible, but I'm mildly obliged to give like a little intro about the University of Rochester Debate Union. For anyone in the room who isn't already a member, some things to know. We are an extremely open team. Most of the people who join don't have any debate experience prior to joining the team. So if you think that what happened here today is really cool, know that the debate that you're about to see is kind of a Frankenstein monster of the two forms of debate that we do. So components of this debate represent the two formats that we do competitively. Also know that there are a good amount of options in terms of what you want to do when you do join the team. So we have two formats of debate that we do competitively. We also have 2 weekly practices, Monday and Thursday, both at 7 p.m. in Dewey 1204, which is downstairs from here. Again, anyone is welcome to join. You can come just watch practice debates that we have if that's what you're into. You're at least into it a little bit if you're here today. You can also come and learn the skill of debate. It's extremely fun just in general. As you'll see today, a lot of people are going to have fun in front of you just now. And the last thing I'll say is we also have a bunch of other initiatives that we are doing to increase the reach of the debate team, such as a growing Spanish language debate section of our team, which I want to give a shout out to. And we can do many more. So if you find this debate interesting, if you find it cool, if you have any sort of questions, or if you want to get involved with the debate team beyond just being here today, after this debate is over, we'll have a little moment where y'all can sign up for our listserv. We don't send a crazy amount of emails, so don't think that that's like an insane thing to do. It'll just be emails about our debate meetings, anything cool that we're doing in the future, etc. So that's the end of my spiel. Again, I'll just repeat it. After this debate is over, feel free to approach me. I'll be like over there with a computer, and you can sign up for our listserv or just ask me any questions about what the team does, what joining looks like, etc. So I'll hand it over to Nikki to introduce this debate.
Can everybody hear? Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here today. My name is Nikki, and I'm the president of the UR Debate Union, who is the people that made this event. So I want to firstly thank our faculty judges who are here today, who gave up their Saturday mornings to come and watch this debate and be really awesome people. The first one is Rachel O'Donnell, who is from the writing department. She served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala and worked as a researcher with the Center for Research on Latin America and the Caribbean in Toronto. So has done some really cool things, and I'm sure has some great perspectives to this debate. The second faculty judge that we have today is Professor Jeffrey Tucker from the English department, who studies literature as a context for discussions about postmodernism, culture and identity politics, and racial representation. I think this will be a very cool thing that Tucker can give their perspectives on, specifically given their wide diaspora of views and experiences. So once again, thank you. Can we have a round of applause for them? The second set of people that I need to thank in my long spiel are co-sponsors who have made this event very possible for us and helped us advertise. The first one is the Pan-African Society Students Association. We'd like to thank them for being here and for also helping us advertise, so a round of applause for them. The second one is ADITI, the Association of Developments of Interest for the Indian Subcontinent. So we want to thank them for being here and helping us advertise. Round of applause. And our two partial co-sponsors, You Are United World and the Society of Caribbean Awareness, who have both helped us advertise, some of them who are here today, but largely helped us advertise. So round of applause for them. Okay, so now that my introductory spiel is over, I'm going to introduce the debaters today, the ones that will do the most of the talking. So we have two sides here today. We have side proposition, who is standing for this motion that Wakanda should not share its vibranium. And we have side opposition, who are obviously saying the opposite. So for side proposition, we have Mindula. Just give us away so we know who we are. Okay, Mindula, Natasha, and Andy. These are all first-year debaters. This is going back to what Clarence said. These people all had no experience in joining the team, so very brand new novices. So a special round of applause. Then we have side opposition. We have Charles, Amanda, and Anne, our side opposition team. Some of who do have experience, but again, all started off with no experience. So we hope that you enjoy hearing from them today. So in terms of the format, what you're going to be seeing today, this debate is structured, like Clarence said, with a mixture of the two formats that we do on Urdu. So you will hear 2 7-minute constructed speeches from both ends, and then followed by a 4-minute summary of each speech. After the first speaker from each side, we'll open the floor up to the other side for cross-examination, where they can ask questions, and anyone from that particular side can choose to answer those questions. It's a 3-minute cross-ex. We hope that you have a lot of fun watching this debate, and at the end of the debate, afterwards our faculty advisors have given their thoughts. We would like to open this floor up for any floor speeches that the audience might have, or just questions that you might have for the debaters. Given that, I don't want to delay this any longer, and we'll call. Oh right, Clarence wants to do a poll, so we're going to get Clarence up here to do the poll, and after that we'll start our debate. So thank you.
So, one fun thing that we do before the debate start is we're going to do like a quick poll just to see where people's opinions on the topic are at the beginning of the debate and the end of the debate. We do this because we're not formally judging, we're just getting opinions, we're getting perspectives. So this is like the closest we'll come to seeing who wins, heavy air quotes, this debate. So if you support the proposition Wakanda should not share its vibranium, as it stands now, not having heard anyone debate the subject, raise your hand. And if you do not support this proposition, you think Wakanda should share its vibranium, raise your hand. Sweet. So as it stands now, we are a pretty even audience of 12 people supporting the motion and 11 people not supporting the motion. So let's see if we can change some opinions today. Without further ado, let's go.
So I'd like to call up the first proposition speaker, Mindula, to open up this debate for us.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The topic at hand today is that Wakanda should not share its vibranium. First of all, I will go on to explain as to what our model is. Then I'm going to move on to our first argument, the need to preserve Wakanda as a black power state. Our second argument, the counterproductiveness of the opposition. Our third argument and fourth argument will be dealt by the second speaker. The third argument will be preservation of Wakanda is important, and fourth argument will be a consequential analysis to explain to everyone as to how it will actually make it worse. Now, moving on to a model, we're going to set this debate in a world where Wakanda has in fact revealed itself. Wakanda will be actively participating in international affairs, and Wakanda will also allow people to come into their country to seek medical attention or seek any kind of help. Now, with that being said, I'm going to move on to my first argument, the need to preserve Wakanda as a black power state. Now, at this point, we believe Wakanda is 100 years advanced in the most advanced countries that we have right now. And they're known for their technological advance, they're known for their advance in society. Basically, they could even be considered an advanced society. And we believe that plays a very major role in breaking stereotypes. Now, we believe a lot of the problems that people of color have in the modern status quo is that there is a pretty big stereotype against them. And we believe Wakanda existing as a black superpower, Wakanda existing as a pioneer in pretty much all the fields that we can think about, breaks that stereotype. Because in reality, ladies and gentlemen, if I am a person of color, and if I want a job, or if I want something, what I want is not other people's charity. I don't want people to give me money. I have skills, and I want people to accept me for the skills that I have. A lot of the reason that there is racism and all that inside is because the amount of acceptance in society is less, and therefore there are a lot of negative stereotypes against people. And this is what leads to racial prejudice and all these unwanted things in society. And we believe Wakanda existing can break those stereotypes. Wakanda can signal to people of color and people who are not of color that, look, black people are capable of pioneering advances that are beyond anything that we thought capable. And we believe that in itself can play a very major role in society in terms of uplifting people's morale and in terms of helping people accept and break the stereotype. And we believe the point that Wakanda existing breaks the stereotype, in fact, helps people break out of racism and help people break the negative stereotype against them. And we are here to prove to you that by sharing Vibranium, you're in fact making the situation worse, and the best thing to do is to keep the Vibranium to themselves and to signal to the world that, look, we are a black power state, and therefore we are capable of doing all these wonderful and phenomenal things. Now, why do we say you devalue your position by sharing Vibranium? Because the moment you start sharing this Vibranium, you're only going to be as good as the rest of the countries. Because over time, your power will devalue and eventually equalize with other people. So by sharing the most valuable thing that you have, you in fact devalue your position. So therefore, the fact of you being a black power state, Wakanda being a black power state, will eventually go down, and therefore they will no longer be able to provide the moral support, break the stereotype, and signal to the entire world sort of things that they signal right now. And also, we believe by Wakanda sharing this Vibranium, they will create a variety of international problems, because they will disrupt the existing global power dynamic, right? They will interfere with the sharing of resources. The moment Wakanda shares its resources, the existing resources, existing valuable resources such as oil, and other mineral resources will no longer be the most valuable. So therefore, they will disrupt the existing global power dynamic, and we do not want that, because that is going to bring unwanted attention and that is going to bring out unwanted backlash within Wakanda, because now other countries will be looking into Wakanda and they will want what Wakanda has, and we don't want that. And therefore, we believe right now Wakanda is existing in an ecosystem, right? They've existed in this ecosystem of where they are self-reliant, they're self-dependent, and they pretty much do things by themselves. So that in itself, ladies and gentlemen, they're functioning in an ecosystem. And by logical consensus, we should agree that people should never go against existing ecosystems which exist in the environment, right? And we have ample of examples of where humans have tried to interfere with these ecosystems and things have gone wrong. And what we're trying to portray is that Wakanda's ecosystem is perfect, and we believe for it to exist, for it to maintain its perfection, it needs to exist the way it is right now. So therefore, we want Wakanda to remain in all its glory, and we want it to be the phenomenon that is right now, because it uplifts people. The best example that I can give to you is the movie itself, right? Because the movie came out, it was such a phenomenon around the world. People they even gave holidays in school for people to go see this movie. It was celebrated. It was known as a celebration of black culture. And we believe by that movie being able to make such an impact, we believe a country existing which can motivate people, which can break the stereotype, will play such a role that it will in fact lift people out of this racist, out of the negative stereotypes which exist in society. Now we're going to move on to my second argument as to why it is counterproductive. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you look at things which have happened in the past, we don't think it's a very good idea for a superpower to interfere with the affairs of other countries, maybe developing countries, because I can give you many examples of where that doesn't necessarily go well. I'm not going to give you the exact examples, but I'm sure everyone is thinking of one particular example, right? So therefore, we don't want a country with a substantial amount of advanced power to go and interfere with countries and tell them, look, this is what you should do. We're going to give you resources so that you can develop a country. We believe the best sort of change is organic change, and that is the exact sort of change which is going to come about through our argument, where people are actually going to uplift themselves, with negative stereotypes will be broken, so therefore organic change will come from their countries, and in fact, eventually these countries will be developing at a rapid pace. And also a very important point is that Wakanda chose to watch slavery happen. Wakanda chose to watch racial injustice for centuries, and they did absolutely nothing. Now, it is an assumption for side opposition to come up here and tell you that, look, everyone else in the world is going to open their hands and accept what Wakanda has to offer, because that's not necessarily right? Because Wakanda does not share the shared identity of going through racism or going through racial injustice, because they don't know. They've been isolated for a millennia, and they have no relation to the issues of the people of color or the racial injustice which exists in this world. So on those points, I rest my case. Thank you.
We thank Ms. Wolf for that speech. We're going to open the floor up for the cross-examination period now. So this is 3 minutes where anybody on side opposition can ask any questions aside from
First question, are Wakandans black Africans, yes or no?
We think that Wakandans are black Africans, but they do not share the same identity that the rest of Africa that have gone through colonization shares.
How do you define this identity?
We think it is defined by a shared history in the experience of colonization, which Wakanda has never experienced. It has been uniquely isolated and detached from any of the forms of colonization.
On your point about how sharing vibranium would break down the ecosystem and the resources that Wakanda holds, does Wakanda garner its status and power from vibranium?
Yes, a lot of the advances that Wakanda has made over the past century also is as a direct result of vibranium being there. So that power is dependent on that vibranium supply.
So my question is, why is breaking this ecosystem bad?
Because as I explained earlier, they're also self-reliant and they're reliant on that vibranium. And once vibranium depletes over time, along with that, considering that the power is so dependent on vibranium, well, when vibranium depletes, their power will eventually deplete.
Well, don't you think that Wakanda's exclusion from like the world ecosystem and I guess like just fight for self-preservation of their own ecosystem further like pushes them away from the people that they're trying to represent?
We think that Wakanda can introduce the change in the status quo, but that by doing so, by sharing resources, is harmful because it is massive and and cultural influence is slow. So, and when we do it for cultural influence, we protect the
So how exactly is having a magical rock going to give you power? Mechanize that, please.
It's just a magical rock and all is opposition on the show.
That doesn't answer the question. Why does vibranium give power to a state?
Because it makes Wakanda uniquely self-sufficient as it wants on a national scale. It gives it access to weaponry and technology, unlike anywhere in the world.
As you see.
So would you agree that it is the technology that is built on vibranium that actually gives the state power?
Yes.
Okay, I guess my last question is, how does like this cultural influence that you were talking about actually work?
Well, as I explained earlier in my speech, a lot of the time people don't want you to give them a resource, or they don't want to give them money, right? They already have the necessary skills necessary them to do something. The only problem is that people aren't accepting of those skills. People are often turned away from job interviews because of the color of the skin. So what Wakanda brings is that they break that negative stereotype and tell people that, look, people of color are actually capable, and look, we're doing it. And by them doing it, it also trickles down to other people who look similar. Therefore, it adds a massive precedence in society to treat people of color with more respect.
Okay, we now call up the first speaker from side opposition, Charles, to open up the opposition case.
Always wanted to do that. Well, good morning. Thank you for coming here and like using your Saturday for this. So let's get into it. So in this debate, the proposition has offered you an ideal world where this ecosystem in which we live in is one that is preferable over a world where Wakanda sharing its vibranium overthrows its ecosystem. And I guess you can believe in that, but I have to give you what that world looked like and what this ecosystem that they're referring to look like. What the proposition brought up to you this morning is that this ecosystem looks like people of color being discriminated against. We believe that is true, but that is not one of the only things that is not one of the only reasons that this is happening. There's a long history of just let's say colonialism, of slavery, of imperialism that have uniquely built those systems to shut out people of color. What do I mean by that? In communities of black people, we see that they have lower access to education, lower access to food, lower access to all these technological advances that the world is sharing. And this has happened because of the history of the slavery shutting up. That is a long thread. We will develop that later on. But like, follow with me. But this ecosystem they are talking about is an ecosystem where black people are just sectioned in a lower rank, sectioned in a lower positionality, a positionality that I can say equals to death, because we see that every day. This ecosystem that they are talking about is an ecosystem in which countries in Africa are reliant upon like economic systems that were built through walls of colonialism that show themselves in neo-colonialism, in the fact that they are built in economic system that they are reliant upon like simply trade with other countries. They can't for themselves like develop like these businesses, these industries that would help them in their development and advancing. And Wakanda is uniquely built in a way that it hasn't shared that history, yes, but that is good. We say that is good because in a way it can help the world because it is technologically advanced and can share with the world. This technology could both help people on the continent of Africa and in America itself. What do I mean by that? The technology that they have would allow these countries in Africa to not only be able to self-reliant themselves, to be able to build these industries that for centuries that the powers of just like neo-colonialism has told them that they are getting to states, to positionalities that the world has told them that they are getting to. Sharing this technology allows them to not only be self-reliant in the ways that this technology can help them cultivate and produce these and produce from these natural resources that they have. That is a benefit that we believe that sharing this vibranium is so far better than what the opposition is presenting to you today. We are saying that through the movie that they have shown like these in America that they have shown that they have built these outreach centers where they can train people to use vibranium. What do I mean? And how does that affect the positionality of the black body in America? This happens through training of usage of the of vibranium as a technology itself. putting black people at the forefront of this technology uniquely helps the black body in the fact that Vibranium, just by knowing that it does exist in the status quo, would create this would create this market for it, would create this need for it, would create this rush for it. We believe that even if Wakanda could shut itself out from the world, that this technology would still be needed. And these outreach centers, uniquely placed in these black communities, can help black professionals learn how to use the technology first. Being able to use the technology first, because it is not a technology that could just we wake up tomorrow, everybody will be using it. It will need some type of way to be produced, to be used in the status quo. And putting black professionals and putting black people at the forefront of this technology is good, because you can uplift the race itself. This cultural benefit they are offering doesn't shut out this material need, this material good that would come out of the sharing of the vibranium that they haven't talked about. 2 points. Being able to not only uplift the African nations in the fact that they are sharing vibranium to allow them to produce from the natural resources that they have, but you also have, in America, where you put not black professionals and black communities at the forefront of this technology to be able to not only cultivate it, but to be able to use it in these communities. It is material good that we believe in. As the great philosopher Uncle Ben once said, with great power comes great responsibility. And it is Wakanda's responsibility to not only be able to show this material good, but they will have this cultural benefit that the proposition as proposed today, but with the adage of this material good. And we believe that is good, and that is why we are proud to propose.
We're now going to have our second PASA examination, beside opposition, beside proposition.
Opposition, because that vibranium is a natural resource, so when power is so dependent on it, and then what's your suggestion when this natural resource eventually runs out?
Okay, so just to clarify the Marvel universe, the entire worth and quantity of vibranium that exists in Wakanda alone is literally 2 times the entire GDP of the world. That's a lot of vibranium. If we're gonna run out, we're gonna run out in over 100 years, and we think that's enough of a time scale to create the benefits that we need to see by sharing it.
Just to clarify, you're providing this vibranium-related technology uniquely to black people, right? Wouldn't that create more backlash, and wouldn't that be counterproductive? Basically, wouldn't that create more backlash towards people?
Why is that backlash bad? Why is it bad? When black people cried out for just equal rights, there was backlash. Do we believe that this backlash is one that we can accept in a world where black people are advancing, put in a better positionality than they are now? Mechanism for dealing with that backlash. The backlash you're talking about is a backlash necessarily that where the world sees black people are just prospering or advancing with this technology. And what would this backlash look like? First of all, it's like you're trying to shut out a market that already exists that you're not trying to get on.
Also, I don't think it's exactly fair for us to have a hypothetical measure for dealing with the hypothetical backlash. We don't know if this is going to happen or not.
So unless you guys can prove to us that backlash will actually occur and what it looks like, we have nothing to rebut.
Opposition, let me offer you this example, because what we're talking about is you're offering the sense that we're only giving this resource to the people of color, but what about the racial tension that just because you're only giving it to this racial group, that now they have more power than others? How would you say that this doesn't exacerbate the racial tension that exists?
So to clarify the model, what we're doing is not giving vibranium only to black people. What we're doing is giving black people the unique ability to be educated by Wakanda. we're giving vibranium to the world. It's up on the free market. Anyone can buy it, sell it, trade it, whatever. It's just there as if we had discovered a new natural resource in the world today. For example, like when we discovered uranium, yeah, certain states had more control of uranium, but that's basically what happens. It gets put on the market.
According to Rui, before Wakanda realized that before Wakanda even shared their vibranium, they in fact lost a bit of vibranium coming to storage, coming from actually within the kingdom, within the king's brother storage, right? Do you have any mechanisms to prevent this vibranium falling in the hands of the wrong people? And do you have any mechanisms to prevent people misusing this vibranium? Because there'll be a lot of vibranium out there.
So not only are we responsible for sharing the vibranium, we're responsible for making sure it is used in the right way. Also,
how exactly?
So effectively, we can deal with that in my speech.
We now call on the next speaker beside government or opposition, the topic.
Right, so what I'm going to do is quickly go over the case that opposition gives us and then tell you exactly how they fail on multiple levels. They tell you that imperialism has built structures that sustain discrimination, neocolonialism is bad, and that the technology that vibranium facilitates will help break these structures. Their model is that this vibranium goes out to just absolutely everyone. It's out there in the free market. And through my case, I'm going to tell you exactly how they fail in every scenario. So they tell you that we have to prove to you why backlash will occur, and I'm going to do exactly that. So the first thing that Mindula tells you is that Wakanda is uniquely isolated. It does not share the identity that the rest of the colonized world shares. We think that this means it lacks the tacit knowledge to actually create change, to actually implement policies that help those countries. We think it's just like every other nation that was never colonized and now decided that it's going to be the savior of the world. So what we tell you is that Wakanda is a constant celebration of black culture, that it subverts tropes, and that's exactly what the film did. We think that this creates empowerment rather than intervention, and that is a safer and better mechanism for creating change in the global world. We tell you that if it shares, Wakanda becomes only as powerful as other states, and the global power dynamic gets disrupted. We do think that the status quo needs change. We just think that if you do it by putting an incredibly dangerous mineral out into the world, you're creating a lot more tension than you have the capability to actually deal with. We think that this doesn't happen if we use only cultural influence, because cultural influence is less tangible, it's less invasive, it's more subtle, and this also allows Wakanda to retain the ability to defend itself. So I'm going to talk about how successful international relations requires trust. And we think that Wakanda will not be able to generate this trust within the countries it seeks to help out. You have to understand that Wakanda is a country that sat back and protected itself while thousands of years of discrimination took place, and it chose to protect itself while sitting on the ability to actually stop things like the slave trade, like discrimination all over the world. So we think that now its entry into the world and suddenly saying that, okay, here we are, we have a wonder mineral and we'll give it off to you, is just going to be perceived as another savior state coming in front and saying, okay, we need to assuage our guilt, so we're going to try and do something nice for once. We think that this makes it extremely difficult for Wakanda to actually implement the things that side opposition is suggesting here, that actually set up outreach centers that are trusted by people, that are actually expected to bring about change. So we think that cultural influence is less in your face, and it buys Wakanda time to actually develop relationships. I'm now going to talk about why vibranium is a dangerous mineral, and that Wakanda has no enforcement mechanism at its disposal. They tell us that Wakanda doesn't need to ensure how vibranium gets used, but we tell you that if you're putting an extremely dangerous mineral that you kept solely to yourself out into the world, into the free market to be used for absolutely anything, then you have to have a mechanism for making sure that it doesn't go into the wrong hands. And we think this is not possible without violating sovereignty. We don't think there's anything Wakanda can do once the mineral is out into the world. So Wakanda cannot enforce anything that happens, and we see this in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We see it during World War II when Howard Stark got access to a small amount of vibranium, and the first thing it went into was weapons development. It doesn't go into solving global poverty or anything like that. It goes straight into the military, which is exactly what we think will happen if Wakanda puts the
vibranium out into the world. We think it will be co-opted by people who are already in power and put straight into development and weaponry, and instead of being, freely available there for people to go into technological training and to uplift with them themselves. We think that their mechanism does not account for any of this, and that is why it fails. We also think that vibranium is just fundamentally an extremely dangerous mineral. Given to developing countries which are prone to civil conflicts, and you risk it falling into the wrong hands. Given to developed countries, and you risk the global balance of power shifting even more starkly. We think you're putting something that's extremely unstable, and you have no mechanism for actually making sure where it goes and what happens to it. We think the only reason that Wakanda has been able to keep itself safe is by keeping it to itself and using it only for internal development. So we think Wakanda stops being uniquely powerful. We think global tensions rise exponentially because this assumption that extremely powerful states, that extremely powerful elites in every state, irrespective of whether those elites are racial or socioeconomic, we think they would try to co-opt this mineral. No one's going to sit back and say, hey, we're totally cool with you bringing out this extremely powerful mineral and giving it to whoever you decide, and we're just going to sit back and let that happen. So, but let's assume their best case scenario. Let's assume that they succeed and they're able to put this mineral out into the world, no one co-opts it, everyone's happy and complies with their wonder world or whatever. We still think that the outcome they're aiming for will not be realized. We can see that their intention is different from that of neo-colonial states. We think the outcome will be identical because their mechanism is fundamentally the same. The mechanism is a top-down approach. It is Wakanda, an external state, going into developing countries and saying, here's a wonder material that's going to change your lives, and now you're not dependent on the West, but you're dependent on us. So Wakanda still retains the ability to withdraw all of that. It retains the military power to step back and say, okay, we changed our mind. So we don't think their model materializes, and they need to prove to us why Wakanda is so uniquely moral a state, which we don't think it is by virtue of the fact that it chose to stay isolationist for thousands of years, that it's suddenly going to have this massive shift in perspective, be out there to help everyone, and just become this massive philanthropist in the world. So we think that if Wakanda uses its cultural influence, its very image in the world that it uses to subvert common narratives about people of color, and specifically Black people, it creates empowerment. It creates this sense of identity where people of color, and specifically Black people, feel like they are capable of going against the common stereotypes that are associated with them and actually achieving everything that Wakandans have achieved. And we think that gives them the ability to create this change for themselves instead of being dependent on this external state to come in and save everyone. And that is why we're very proud of this.
Great job, Natasha. And we call Amanda the second speaker beside opposition now. So finish off the last two speak.
Hello? Oh, wild. Okay. This debate is about power. This debate about how power has been used to deny Black people across the world the access to the necessary resources they need to fight oppression of the white state, of white people in general historically, and of the subjugation and continued subjugation of their economies, of their people, of their bodies and their lives. This is the first time in history, in this hypothetical world, that the towering structures of oppression can finally be dismantled. In a world where white people have indiscriminately enslaved Africans and have continued to propagate violence on the Black body in the form of police brutality, economic subjugation, and armed conflict, we understand on our side fundamentally that being Black, for those without the privilege to choose, is not a choice. So when side proposition gets up here and tells you that they do not culturally identify, they do not understand what it means to be Black, but still say that they are Black Africans living in a world of white people where white power structures still exist, that point does not stand. Proposition has fundamentally misunderstood the case in what we are saying. We bring you three important points that Charles covers. At the end of Charles' speech, he tells you about the moral obligation that Wakanda has to protect its people, its interests, and the interests of Africans all over the world and their descendants. This is crucial, right? They say that Wakandans don't have a moral obligation to help the oppressed because they do not culturally identify with other black people. We say that culture is shaped by shared experience, and because the narratives of the world are ones where black people have to fight to be heard, use white voice to be respected, be white to not get arrested on your own damn campus, that's shared experience enough. And even if you don't think that's enough, recognize that the dominant group in society determines the way we partition identities. The life of any person of color is a life where they have to identify as the racial identity. They don't get the choice. So in this world, when we put Wakanda in the real world, they don't get the choice either. We don't get to choose whether or not we have to identify with the oppression that is placed upon us. The oppression that black individuals face in this world today is the same, and that will be forced onto Wakanda the moment it reveals itself. The moral obligations exist not because they are fighting for the lives of the oppressed, but because they are fighting for the lives of themselves. Why is this important? This is important because Wakanda uniquely is the only state in the world, now that the world is like this, right, that has the ability to design the introduction of vibranium and vibranium technology into a world to shift the power structures, shift the economic structures into the hands of people whose lives matter as well. How do we do this? 2 points from Charles, right? We educate. So Charles gets up here and gives you the fact that like oppression still exists in the world because of a lack of access. In particular, in developed countries or like so-called developed countries, right? It's really about access to education. If you're a poor black kid in a neighborhood and you're going to a public school and the public school district doesn't have enough money, it's probably going to be like a shitty school, you know, right? You're probably not going to be able to access, Harvard University, Yale, Princeton, whatever. All of these things where like the majority of people who graduate from there with a public policy degree end up on the Supreme Court regardless of whether or not they've like sexually assaulted other people, like that's kind of like, fucked up about this world, right? This is the world we live in. You have to address that, you have to understand that type proposition has not addressed the real world in which we exist, right? Okay, so what does this look like? They claim that they uplift the spirits of black people. Sure. What do? I don't know. They kind of just sit there with their vibranium and like pedal soft power. Okay, what does that do? What are we doing? We're literally going into these communities and saying, hey, you should learn how to use vibranium. Why? Because now that we have this mineral out in the world, no one knows how to use it. Like, I have no idea how to use uranium because I'm not a nuclear physicist. I have no idea how minerals are used. So when they claim that minerals are like dangerous, like they're literally rocks, dude. Like, what are we going to do with rocks? You have to learn how to use these rocks in order to even make weapons, make them powerful. When we reveal ourselves to the world and we share vibranium, they have no idea, like the white people, the Americas, the Russias, whatever, how are they going to make nukes with vibranium if they literally have no idea how? What we're saying is we're going to teach black individuals in poor black communities how to use vibranium to create medical technologies, to create stuff that they can get into engineering school with in their portfolio, just put it on your admissions application to the University of Rochester, you might get in, that would be cool. Right, so that's what we're doing. We're giving black people the access to the education that they need. This dismantles fundamentally the structures that keep these people poor, keep these people subjugated in the structures that we exist in today. That's what happens in developed countries. In developing countries, again, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what happens in the world today. Okay, so nearly 140 years ago, colonizers sat at a table and literally just drew lines on Africa. Why? Because they wanted to divide the state. Why? Because they want to extract natural resources, just like how the world's going to try to extract vibranium from Wakanda and everywhere we give it to. That's why we made it free market principles. Cool. So 2 things. They did this without regard to people, culture, and ethnic groups. They systemically partitioned Africa so that they can enact grave acts of injustice with the theft of natural resources and the exploitation of African peoples in the form of dehumanization, conquest, and literally slavery. If you thought this ended with post-colonial state, you were wrong. Military subjugation has evolved, as Charles tells you, to become economic subjugation and the continued exploitation of African peoples. What does this look like today? This looks like 12 African states still having to pay France money because France holds all of their foreign reserves. That's what happens in real life. That's also super fucked up. Why does France have all the money? Because they colonized them previously. These structures of colonization are still here today. What else does this look like? This looks like China and One Belt, One Road and going and they're like, hey, if you give us your mineral resources, we'll give you stuff and infrastructure to help you faster extract those mineral resources. That's kind of messed up, That's what neocolonialism looks like in this world, and that's what we're trying to fight. right? They say that if we share vibranium, it'll just fall into the hands of people with power anyway. We say that when we transition developing economies into exporting finished goods created using vibranium technologies that we uniquely teach them how to do before the white people figure out how to do it, we can dismantle exploitative dependency on the Western world and I guess also China, right? Like when Wakanda invests in education and the stabilization of developing economies by giving them vibranium, we give them means to create finished goods. When they can export their own stuff and set their own prices because they have unique products, they will truly be independent. In our world, Wakanda is actually making a difference. We're not peddling soft power. Okay, final rebuttal. If you're going to buy their argumentation, right, that soft power and cultural influence is somehow going to eventually fix oppression by being a good example to people, recognize literally what they're saying. They're saying that Wakanda should become a superpower. Okay, recognize that in human history, the path to become a superpower has been literally the same for each superpower that has ever arisen. Recognize that the rules of the game are rigged and they were created, A, when Rome decided to expand the religion to the rest of the world, B, when America decided to manifest destiny, when the colonists decided to divide Africa. The nations that declare the expansion of their state as both justified and inevitable are the nations that eventually become superpowers. Influence and cultural power is just the gaslight version of the word control. They're saying that Wakanda should amass power and control. In a world where Wakanda does not share vibranium, they have to play by the rules. We say what black feminist Audre Lorde said, that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. If you buy their argument, Wakanda will be forced to take on a mechanism of economic expansion, coercive subjugation, and human commodification that is the same narrative peddled by the colonizers who first divided Africa. What do we bring you on side opposition? What we do on our side is we fundamentally and radically shift the economic, social power and structures for black people on the ground. We actually do stuff instead of be an example. We dismantle first oppressive structures in the Western world that keep black people poor, and second, we dismantle oppressive structures in the developing world that keep them dependent on Western nations, like France and Britain. If it comes to the weaponization of vibranium, if it comes to war, recognize that given the direct results of partitioning a continent in its people is at best case ethnic conflict, and at worst case literal genocide, like we saw in Rwanda in 1995, we dismantle oppressive structures. We would much rather prefer war. Thank you.
We call up the last two speakers from side opposition. Andy.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are not looking at a situation where we don't understand what blocks are, and that's not how. If we didn't understand what blocks are, we wouldn't have built the most advanced civilization in the world in the first place. Number two, we do have an idea of what the world today and exactly if we're trying to we acknowledge that the problems that you're saying it is a problem that should be addressed, but you at your side of the house you still didn't address how exactly by sharing vibranium and how exactly are you going to carry it through and the exact measures that you're going to do can actually benefit. On our side of the house, we're not saying that we're not going to help at all. We're going to help, but we're going to use better method that is more insured, that won't disrupt the system that exists already. We're gonna be presenting a situation where using other forms of help that creates a better and more insured way of progress for the society. And again, on the third last point, we're looking at we're not a superpower who will immediately, suppress every single civilization that's today, because we did have the capacity 500 years ago, and we didn't do it, and we didn't even show our face, so we will not do it right now. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me present to you let me bring you back to the last 5 minutes of the movie where T'Challa's walking on the street of Auckland, and we're gonna just play the pause button right there, and we're going to show you that is not the world that we're going to look like, and that's not the world that we want to look like, and that's not the world that you're going to want to look like, because on the other side of the house, they have no idea what this chaos and disaster that happens right after if they hit the play button. So on our side of the house, we're gonna ask you to rewind a little bit and offer you an alternative ending. And let me remind you the framework and this existence of Wakanda and the existence of Vibranium. And we're also looking at this. We're also going to participate in international affairs, just not with the involvement of Vibranium. We're still helping others, but contributing to progress using other means that is better than sharing the Vibranium that is uninsured and unprecedented in the ways that happened before. So we're also especially emphasizing on the idea of a symbol that just holding Vibranium and not letting it out of the border can bring, and this idea of Black supremacy and Black excellence, and with this symbol known, this motivated and inspired group of individuals that could be possible today that won't be exactly possible if we shared it in the first place. And we're also looking at this this idea that by not sharing we break the persistent social cultural narrative about Black people, and this has tremendous benefits, including like the one that the film itself has already shown us today about like how the idea of the box office strike has made a tremendous impact on the world, and the box office has suggested and revealed its presence to a lot of people that wouldn't have known this before. But we're also looking at this identity and confidence that is bringing to the environment, and that is all signs of empowerment. And so let me remind you again of how their team failed. So number one is that the situation that they suggested, yes, we need to solve the problem, but the way that they solve the problem just won't work. Because remember, who actually wants Wakanda's help? Because we're looking at this long backdated history where we talked about this racial segregation and slavery that happened, but Wakanda as a nation, they just never stepped in. And then so like by sharing it right now, it would create an even worse situation by hatred, by people people will respond in hatred, and people will respond in chaos and disaster. So we're also looking at this insurance mechanism that just doesn't, it's not present here. So they're looking at like this dangerous free market we know that the free market doesn't always guarantee exactly what's gonna happen. But yeah, so also we're gonna, the second way that it failed is that the bad outcome that it brings. So again, let me remind you in ways that our team one, that we preserve the Black power state, and number two, we cannot uplift the others by just sharing Vibranium. By those reasons, let me please ask you to rewind that button and offer this alternative ending. Thank you very much.
It's really that part that they turn on the air. Okay, so bad joke done. We call it the last whip, the last summary speaker from side opposition.
Hi all. Okay, so last speech. Please stay with me. We're almost done. I'm just going to be summarizing both sides. So first of all, we start with the proposition is saying that Wakanda should act as a cultural symbol in the international platform and slowly push for change through its influence. But just presence alone is not enough to create change for the oppression of Black nations and Black bodies. And as my partners Amanda and Charles have said or pointed out, the government is saying that the Wakanda doesn't share an identity with other Black nations. So if it doesn't share the same identity as other Black nations, then it can't serve to represent them in the international realm, and there can't, no positive change can be produced. Or if they do share the same identity, then it's not enough to just influence the world through world politics through their presence. We think that on our side of the house, we think that there is this moral obligation to actually take action and share resources and educate the Black bodies. And we think that Wakanda does share a collective identity with other Black nations. So there is the moral obligation to lift them out of their systematic oppression. On our side of the house, we give you that we have to start the process of change by sharing Vibranium, and it's the only way to have this change due to its tied ancestry and shared identity to other African nations and black bodies. The proposition says that sharing vibranium will lead to weaponization, will lead to backlash, will lead to all of these negative consequences. But as my partners have explained, first of all, we're not saying that there's zero chance weaponization where all this backlash will happen. Sure, but outreach centers are specialized for distributing vibranium in a measured and safe ways. So there's not going to be this sudden like World War III or like this horrible like international relations backlash that the proposition is talking about. That's fake news. And at the point where and second of all, at the point where the proposition's position is just to be okay with Wakanda acting as a cultural symbol, if that we don't even know if they represent or the proposition doesn't even know if they share a collective identity with other black nations, with other black bodies, that they can even represent these people, is and hoping that its presence on the international realm will create change for black bodies. We're saying no, we have a moral obligation to actually do something, and we say that outreach centers will first of all help educate black bodies and empower them to be on the technological front when vibranium is released into the market. They're the only ones that are going to have the knowledge to know how to use technology, I mean vibranium in technology, how to harness its powers, and this will automatically push these people that are in oppression, will lift them into the forefront and put them at a dominant position in the Western world. And also, sharing the technology will shift the paradigm so that black people actually have the physical means of breaking through their chains of oppression. And that means that, again, the black bodies in the Western world are no longer in the cycle of oppression, and the black nations in the underdeveloped world no longer are slaves to the Western nations, and they break out of the cycle of neo-colonialization where they're still just allowing these Western nations to be dominant over them, but they actually have the means to break out of this and be a nation for themselves. And the alternative is just to let oppression and injustice continue, because the proposition is really giving you nothing. They're not going to enact all this magical change just by being on the forefront. So we are the only side that can actually actualize these solutions, and at any risk that sharing vibranium will lead to these impacts, then we need to share, because as Killmonger says, even his ancestors knew that death was better than symbolic bondage. Thank you.
Okay, so before we hand over the floor to our faculty judges to say really smart things, I want to see how the actual debate itself has potentially shifted perspectives within the audience. So again, who amongst y'all supports, after the debate, after hearing what everyone had to say, supports the motion that Wakanda should not share its vibranium? Okay, and who does not support that motion and thinks that Wakanda should share its vibranium? So it is still super close. So we are still neck and neck. However, the neck and neck has switched. Whereas before the debate started, the proposition side was 1 point ahead, and now the opposition side is 1 point ahead. So would love to hear from y'all in a second in terms of audience members being able to ask questions or give 1-minute floor speeches about their perspectives. But before that, let's hand things over to our esteemed faculty judges.
So just before we move on to that, just want to have a huge round of applause for everybody that worked very hard to put this debate together. Thank you guys, especially to all the people that supported us to put on this fantastic event. Black Panther was a cool movie, but I think what happened after Black Panther was a question that everybody had on their mind. So hopefully we were able to like sort of put that pause button on and give you a new alternative. So now we're going to turn to our faculty members today to just give their view on what they felt the debate was like and just any thoughts and feedback they might have. So if you guys want to stand there, that's fine. If you want to come up here, that's also fine. Yeah, that's cool.
want to say a few things. This whole discussion on the kind of power of Black peoples really reminds me of the work of Frantz Fanon, a philosopher and revolutionary and writer from the French Caribbean colony of Martinique, who is thought of as the leading anti-colonial thinker of the 20th century. As an intellectual, Fanon was a political radical concerned with the psychopathology and colonization on Black peoples worldwide and the consequences of decolonization that everyone spoke to today. 20th century liberation movements influenced his thinking, and his thinking also revolutionized Black peoples throughout the world to overthrow their oppressive colonial systems. Fanon's primary work was called Black Skin, White Masks, where he discusses what racism and the global white supremacy the proposition spoke of does to the individual in body and mind. In Black Skin, White Masks, he outlines how we assume that race creates racism, but is in fact its opposite. Racism creates race, racism creates racism because the concept of race itself is false. In Wretched of the Earth, another of his early writings, Fanon outlines his thoughts on the necessity of the violent overthrow of colonialism as a whole. So he saw Black liberation as a giving of power back to Black communities that the opposition spoke of, but also as the importance of it in the kind of liberation of Black peoples worldwide from the US, the Caribbean, and South Africa. Remembering that colonialism was not just Portugal or Spain going out and sticking their flag in Latin America or the Caribbean, but the Black experience in Southern Africa or in the United States is and was a direct result of colonialism. So Fanon's analysis must much be stretched to deal with the realities of racism today, including an analysis of a world in which the movie Black Panther can be made. So that saying Wakanda, which may have never experienced colonialism, still exists in this kind of colonial world. Fanon looks at the psychology of the colonial relationship and what he calls the colonized mind. He was greatly preoccupied with what he saw as the paralyzing inferiority complex of Black peoples and the idolization of whites as role models. He wrote to galvanize what he called the mentally colonized of the Third World to rise up and overthrow their oppressors by first retrieving their self-esteem on the way to achieving freedom. This is what Black Panther does for us, right? Recognizing that these are all direct products of the racial superiority and the socioeconomic ascendancy white peoples have acquired violently through the colonial period and continue to acquire. But of course, this is the paradox of national liberation movements worldwide in the post-colonial period, the expectation being that those national liberation movements would free countries from the dependence and inequality, and we know now from 20th century history that this didn't happen. So I don't think it would necessarily happen in Wakanda either. Often oppressors were simply replaced by a new group of oppressors, political, economic, and social elites with continued dependence on exports, or one crop, or one mineral that we kind of spoke of today, one system of power replacing another. The color of the skin doesn't necessarily matter because ultimately Fanon saw that the white masks of the now Black oppressors were still subjugating the majority of Black peoples worldwide. And I think this is where we really find ourselves now. Thinking about Black Panther amid a resurgence of books on Fanon, the resurfacing of his theoretical work on the ground among anti-racist activists, especially in the United States, groups like We Charge Genocide, groups working on the refugee crisis, police brutality, global capitalism, all sorts of grassroots activists are recalling Fanon. In the academy, he is often read, but read in a way that tends to downplay Black liberation as a necessity of the overthrow of global capitalism. So what can we learn about Fanon in terms of developing an alternative or a Wakanda that we want? Ultimately, I think the total liberation that Fanon speaks to is possible, but we must resist the efforts of whites in the academy, like myself, who deny and minimize the importance of Black pride as a way toward Black liberation. Fanon and Black Panther tell us that Black peoples must first be filled with a proud and liberated self, a necessary step in the struggle for total liberation.
Thank you, Professor, for those enlightening words. I think Professor Jeff Tucker also has the words to enlighten us with.
Hi everyone. So first, thank you for that application of Fanon to the debate and to Black Panther. Great. So let me make just a few kind of general observations, and then I'll kind of, my observations and comments will move from the general to the specific. Let me also preface everything I say by saying that I'm new to debate, and so everything I say in terms of comment and questioning is like completely out of ignorance. But let me first say what's cool about debate, from what I've seen, is that there's this combination of planned and prepared content with content that responds to statements sort of at the moment. In a way, it's kind of like jazz, in that there's a structure, and again, there's a script, but there's an awful lot of improvisation in response to what other, if you will, debaters or musicians are doing, and that's something I find really fascinating and fun and entertaining to participate in. Let me see, I also want to say that I was impressed with how both sides, all the debaters, demonstrated a knowledge of the history of colonialism in the world, but also a knowledge and respect for the movie Black Panther and the Marvel Universe, and that's something that really, I think, enhanced the arguments that were made. It was also interesting to see how the arguments, both the opposition and the proposition arguments, moved inside and outside of the fictional story. There were arguments that were made as if Wakanda was a real place, and then there were arguments that were made with the understanding that this was just a story or a movie. That was interesting. I don't know if it was a contradiction or a paradox. A contradiction sort of suggests that there's a flaw to the logic. Paradox suggests that there's something it's not a flaw, it's something that's kind of bigger than a flaw, and perhaps even poetic and powerful. So that's something to reflect on, the pros and cons of moving inside and outside the fictive aspect of the story, Black Panther. Something else that both sides did is they made arguments about a positive effect on Wakanda. So they made arguments in the interest of Wakanda, and both sides made arguments in the interest of the world outside of Wakanda. And so again, I'm wondering, to what extent does making those types of arguments strengthen and support the side, and to what extent does making both types of arguments create a contradiction in this? And so again, that's something to think about. There's so much, lots of other comments that I could make. One other thing that I noticed, both sides made arguments about the potential, Wakanda's potential as a colonizing power, basically. And which I thought was interesting. That's not something I had thought about before. But it's interesting that both sides mobilized that concern for both sides of the argument. I guess the whole point of debate is to choose a topic that is really complex and that you can argue both sides on strongly. I guess I was also interested in the way in which the proposition was formulated. The proposition is Wakanda should not share its vibranium, so that was chosen as the proposition, and the opposition, I guess, is the negative of that, which is Wakanda should not share its vibranium. You know what I'm saying? I'm interested in why we didn't choose Wakanda should share its vibranium positive as the proposition. So I'm sure there's some logic behind that choice. But it's really interesting, sort of like the opposition is like a double negative in a way. Just some comments on kind of technical aspects. I think it's great, for example, during both during the cross-examinations and the final summaries, just the way in which debaters would refer to what their teammates said. So things like, as my partners have explained, those kinds of signposts, attributive tags are really useful and very helpful. Let's see. Let me also, this is a kind of a content or conceptual idea. The notion that vibranium is a dangerous mineral was news to me, and I thought that was really interesting. Again, getting back to the notion that both sides demonstrated a knowledge of the Marvel Universe, so there were allusions to Tony Stark or Tony Stark's father on, I think, the opposition side. There's also an allusion to Uncle Ben Spider-Man with the card. And I have to say that one hit me where I live. So, okay, you got me. So let me also though make one, and I think both sides did this. Debaters would say, you know, we have examples, or I could give many examples, and then you didn't give examples. From where I sit, as an English professor, you have to provide examples. You can't just say there are examples, or I could give you a lot of examples. No, you have to give. I'm from Missouri. You have to show me. That's, you know, so you have to give examples. You can't just say there are a lot of examples. You got to give those examples. So. Oh, and let me just, I guess my final comment is that the cross examinations were awesome in terms of just the back and forth. I felt like I was watching a tennis match. There was just really kind of astute articulation of points, and then the response was very snappy and fascinating to watch, engaging. So that part of it especially I thought was quite good. So why don't I stop right there?
Thank you, Professor Tucker. Dear, that's loud. Okay, thank you, Professor Tucker, for those enlightening words. Again, I want to have a very loud round of applause for the two faculty members that gave up their Saturday to be here. So, sorry, did no one get that? Okay. I also see Dean Burdick, who walked in a little late, but like recording too.
No, if somebody wants to bribe me with some vibranium, I'll take it.
Okay. Okay, Natasha, you're saying it's really like valuable. I think Dean Burdick's okay. So now we're just going to open this. So we did get pizza, but before I let you guys go zoom on the pizza, we're going to open the floor up for the 1-minute speeches or just any questions that people in the audience might have for the debaters. This is a great time to just like maybe say anything that you thought of when they were talking or when you first heard the motion. Yeah, so if we want to just like raise your hands, that works too. So we're going to take our co-sponsor first. Go.
I enjoyed it very, very much. I had interesting ideas coming from different people. Some things that stood by me is the idea of sharing. Every time I associate sharing with Pan-Africanism, it never worked for any good. Like, I'll take you back into the fight between the Zulus and the British, the Battle of Iswadan in Sandwan. They came with the idea of sharing the culture and the land and everything, and it ended in a battle. And so many people died. We go back to South Africa today, you go down the streets of Cape Town with the idea of sharing the minerals and everything else. There's so much distinction. You could feel it in the place, or in the idea of sharing. Let's take you back to Congo DRC. Today, a child is missing a bullet on top of his head because of this idea of sharing. Go to Libya, and I'm using these countries as I hear the word Wakanda. It's fictional, but I try to fit in. What if it was Libya? Well, it can't work because it ended up in a mess. What if it was Congo DRC? It can't work because it ended up in a mess. So I have a problem with the idea of sharing. How about we put it in terms of partnership? Like, how do we create a Wakanda which is highly educated enough to make its own decision without facing the sanctions from the West? Like, oh, we're gonna give you $30,000, but you gotta use it this way and you gotta send us these mirrors. That's the problem right there. Because if you don't do that, Zambia just lost its energy company. And that's what's happening right now in the process of sharing. So I really had a problem with the title sharing because it's so vague.
Does any debater want to respond to that?
Yeah, so in the context of debate, the motion is generally vague so that each of the side can define exactly what it is. So because we have the issue of it's like a flip debate where the proposition is the negative, we did get the opportunity to define what sharing means. And I think that's like something that generally speaking, the first speaker is supposed to like set up for us. So the fact that the model or like the word sharing is rather vague is up to us to define.
saw no. Sorry, I think this is more hands. I saw no hands, so sure.
Hey, I have just two quick questions for the proposition. First, for the proposition, don't you think that sort of sitting on this hoard of vibranium and using it to, generate pretty much all of the economic and technological output of this, I guess, non-genuinely African Wakanda, in your eyes, is going to just build resentment from the colonizing world? Oh, these people are only successful because this massive meteorite with a magical rock is buried under their country, right? Like, how does Wakanda represent a genuine? I guess it's really one question. How does Wakanda represent a genuine country for Black people and Black power, right? If the only reason it continues to be successful is because it has access to a cheat code.
Yeah, that is a fair point. There is space for other countries to call out and say, look, you only got rich and technologically advanced because you have this one research, you got lucky, right? I guess if that point was brought up in the debate, the way we respond is that we believe that Wakanda has Wakanda has moved to a point where they're not only known for their vibranium, they're also known for their technology. So at some point in time, Wakanda has, although they have vibranium, their identity is not solely based on vibranium. There's so much more to Wakanda than its vibranium. Because like the way they structure their society and so the way they run their country, I mean technically if you look at it, Wakanda is sort of like a dictatorship, right? That one leader. And yet it works so well within Africa. That in itself is unique to Wakanda. So, and the reason they've been able to sustain that kind of leadership and that kind of society, and in a very advanced way, that Wakanda has their own identity, which is different from what having vibranium.
We also see, sorry.
Yeah, and that will impact, and that will help other people sort of understand like nuclear. So
we see in the comics the people of the Jabari lands, which are the surrounding hinterlands around Wakanda, right? In the new Ta-Nehisi Coates series, are like resentful of Wakanda for not providing them the vibranium and view them as outsiders and not genuinely as, which is sort of, I just think, an interesting little argument. But for the opposition, right? Hey, remember? Okay.
Hi.
So I'm just, we see in the movie Ulysses Claw just sort of takes this vibranium and can immediately like blow people's heads with it, right? So I don't think the problem is that only Wakanda knows how to use vibranium. I think like under the context of the, what vibranium is meant to be in the Marvel universe, right? It's like this dangerous. It is a genuinely dangerous mineral, right? It's like if anybody could synthesize a nuclear bomb if they had uranium, right? Like it's known how to use this. And Captain America's shield is made of it, and the second Howard Stark gets it, he makes all these, weapons, right? So, like, I think the proposition's point that there is no, I still agree with the opposition after the debate, but I think the proposition's point that there's no safety mechanism for preventing this.
So we actually read, I ran out of time to respond because I had a lot of things. But we were going to say that, like, yeah, okay, given that, like, it would be weaponized, we would much prefer a world in which at least, so like in the world today, people still die. In particular, Black people still die from armed conflict that is the direct result of colonization and the partitioning of Africa. So given that every single day there are people dying, we would much prefer a war in which at the end of the war, the status quo is different. Because every day we don't have that war is another day where the wars of today still continue. Yeah.
And also you have to remember that like with the use of vibranium, there's like basic misunderstanding of it and the world of just like the other world, because like Howard Stark only made a shield with it because he thought it was just a heavy metal. This like new usage is like introduced when the world of Wakanda is open to the world. Ulysses Claw, like he made this thing that he blew at heads with, but that was after years later and after I forgot his name. The robot basically like I forgot his name. I keep forgetting his name all the time. Like actually like showed them how to mechanize it, and we believe like this I guess like this like I guess this time would provide like just that perfect like time for just like us to just uplift with it.
We also see it like gets used for like healing properties.
Yes. So like those aren't really understood by the world yet. So we believe like that basic misunderstanding will give us time to just like be able to put people at forefront of what this technology is developed into.
Hey.
I think it was like
Yeah, so I have a question proposition. So you bring forward that there's going to be a shining pillar and example of black success and excellence. So I mean, right now there's enough black excellence to fill Rashtri's like 10 times over, right? So is it not the problem of more success, but attributing that the success to people who actually do it? So in your world, the success you make is a lot like easier to hand wave away as, oh, they just had vibranium, so therefore they were successful. It's not due to a genuine talent or a genuine capacity. So in a world which is really likely to downplay and minimize their success, aren't you just giving them like a softball to hit out the park?
So like the way we see it is that not only we wouldn't think that's true because if we look, this is, as we mentioned before, this is like a really dangerous and very like powerful natural resource, right? So given that this exists and there's this group of people who are maintaining like the existence of it, they can still, you know, like not get into a conflict and like prolong the society for so long that it has before without like a huge disturbance or anything with the social structure that it carried on for centuries. We think that that itself like can be motivating and could be inspirational to many students.
I think what makes Wakanda special was that in order for Wakanda to gain their technological advancement, they didn't rely on any other race but themselves. So it was black people relying on black people to gain a superior place and not relying on other races at all. And I think that adds a lot of value. And also, if you can make that argument which you just made for anything, if you say, look, the only reason you got a PhD is because you go on to the rich family and you got a lot of opportunity. So I feel like you can make that argument, but then I feel like Wakanda having advanced and being self-reliant on themselves, so kind of overshadows the other factors like being used to. So
Exactly the revolutions. One would be that there is a difference between black individuals being successful and the massive structural success that we see in Wakanda, which is in nation and itself as well. I also think that the characterization could change because one of the all of Africa had a lot of mineral wealth, but I think something that uniquely allowed Wakanda to succeed is the fact that they were not colonized, and you can attribute that to vibranium and just luck giving them access to a mineral that they could use to prevent themselves from colonization. But I think that's something that's an important part of their history that we don't know.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Really quickly, in terms of the proposition argument about how Wakanda can't, I suppose claim the black culture of Africa, I think that there are several issues with that. Primarily, understand that Wakanda itself is a metaphor for blackness, where they literally, their national identity is to hide themselves, to prevent white narratives, to follow white narratives, so that they won't be colonized in the first place. So I think that when you say that they won't be able to claim portions of that identity or shared experience with other black countries, I don't think that's representative of the fact that Wakanda's literal foreign policy is to pretend like they don't have any technology, it's pretend like they don't have any wealth, just so that they can fit a white narrative and prevent like any colonial or neo-colonialist tendencies in the Western world.
If that's a good point, but I just want to clarify that when you say that it doesn't share the same identity, you're talking specifically about the history of colonial experience. Do you think that that's something we kind of doesn't have? But in terms of a cultural identity, it is very much a celebration. Like we see in the movie about how they designed all of it. It's very heavily based on the African cultures. So we do think that that overall cultural identity does possibly share. But the history of being colonized and having to deal with its ramifications is something
Wonderful. I think there was one last comment. We'll take one last comment and then, yeah, sure.
I really liked how everyone established like the politics of the debate before perspective, but I kind of found it interesting why not talk about it from an economic standpoint. So if you think about it like an economic perspective, a lot of political scientists and economists talk about the resource curves. So if a country is full of resources and they're not sharing it, then definitely like at the end of the road they won't be across roadblocks. And other than that, I kind of found something that's on this proposition side that interesting. I believe someone was talking about initially racial prejudice being a problem. So the thing about racial prejudice is definitely the cause of difference of power between races. And then at the same time, they talk about becoming a superpower as a conduct. Isn't the whole point of diminishing that difference of power across the inequality of power and not become more powerful? Right? Like what do you find for example? Power or equality?
So, to answer that question, we feel it's easier to go up to a certain power than rather than to bring up the power down. If that makes sense. Because it's easy for Wakanda to use their influence to uplift people, right? And we don't. It's hard to make a case that Wakanda can use their influence to bring down people or make a race less powerful. I mean, in fact, in reality, it's what happens. When another race comes up to that level, then no longer is powerful.
So like we stay in like the universe of comics and then go to like not Marvel but DC. Harvey Dent said, right, like that you live long enough to, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain, right? So like the refutation that you get from our side is this idea that like if you're trying to become a superpower, is that not just buying into white power structures and like feeding this hegemony that already exists? Like with Franz Fanon, it's literally like you are now black skin, white mask. You've adopted the tendencies of the colonialist state in order to propagate your like national identity, which is, I guess, like what the refutation is. And I guess like on the idea of the resource curse as a narrative, like I think it's not the end of the story. Like I think a lot of us like to conceptualize Africa as if it is just like, oh, everything terrible that happened is because of resources. And like in a sense, like everything stems from that initial, yeah, we're gonna like take resources. But there's so much more complex things that are happening. So then when you ask us like, okay, like we should have made it, or like why didn't we make an economic argument? We wanted to keep the debate accessible because we originally came up with this like really whack, like, we're gonna create the Vibranium standard and we're gonna like make all of the economies depend on Vibranium because at least it's not gold, and like, and we felt like that would be very inaccessible for a public audience, which is why you don't hear more of an econ debate, and we centered more around the politics and like the people accessing like things like education, which are things that are more like concrete and relatable.
Yeah. That being said, I do want to thank everybody who asked for a question or a clarification. I think all your views are what makes public debates really interesting, because we talk all the time, we're debaters, but it's really nice to see audiences interacting. Just before you guys go get pizza, one last little bit of closing, advice. So this motion that you saw today, or this topic that you saw today being debated, is actually a topic that was run in DC for a finals round last year. So these are the sorts of topics, like fun motions like this. Oftentimes when we think of debate, we think of like boring econ motions. We do get some of those, but we also get really fun motions like this. So with that, I just want to like do a last bit of plugging of the UR Debate Union. You guys should definitely come through. We meet Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. in Dewey downstairs, just the debate room. And we will have a meeting on Monday, so I'd like to see many of you there. They're fun motions like these ones. We're not debating dry econ motions. But that being said, I really hope everybody had fun today, but also like is taking something away. Please feel free to come and approach any of the debaters, Coach Clarence or myself. If you want to get on the listserv, we don't send that many emails. Please come see me. We'll add you to the listserv so you can get emails about like cool events that we're doing. Once again, thank you so much for coming today. I think Clarence has something to add.
Yeah, so if you want to get on our listserv, this laptop that is very near to the pizza, so you can